All right, you guys ready? Ready? Perfect. Would you light for me, please? All right, crew. We left off with the Bessemer process and the rise of Andrew Carnegie. The Bessemer process was discovered by English inventor and bullet maker Henry Bessemer in Sheffield, England. What it did was created a new and cheap process to produce steel. Now, there was an American competitor from Pittsburgh that was not Andrew Carnegie that was also trying to keep up with Bessemer at this time. His name is Henry Kelly, and he discovered the pneumatic process, but Bessemer kind of beat him to it. Henry Kelly ends up later working with Andrew Carnegie. So the Bessemer process, or the Bessemer converter process, blew air on red-hot iron, which burned carbon deposits off of it. This also required the use of what is called a boiler. The Bessemer converter boiler was kind of like this pear-shaped boiler that got insanely hot, but was also not only dangerous, but innovative. America was one of the few nations that had all the ingredients that you needed to become a steel empire. Lots of coal, lots of iron, accessible waterways, and lots of timber. Pittsburgh is the perfect place for this because of all the rivers that flow through, the mountains, access to coal, access to timber, access to iron. Also, Pittsburgh is the headwaters of what important river that flows east and dumps into the Mississippi. We talked about it back in the Revolutionary War era. It is the Ohio River. Very good. Steel boilers were highly efficient. They were also very dangerous. What they would do, condense water vapor in the exhaust gases. This allowed for the recovery of latent heat evaporation. Once you start to get gasoline and oil involved, the productivity of this process increases by like 90%. So this process just gets better and better at the turn of the century. Also, it becomes safer, but these factory owners aren't that worried about safety in this period of time. We'll talk more about that as we move forward. Carnegie, Scottish immigrant, a little bit about his background. Family immigrates to America when he's a kid. He only received like 5 years of education. The family was destitute. They're in Pittsburgh. He goes to work. There's a job that totally changes his life. He is going to be a courier for a telegraph company. But he was like a savant. He could understand Morse code and transcribe it faster than the stenographers could. So word starts to spread about how well he can read Morse code or understand it. And the president of the Pennsylvania Railroad Company hires him on to be his personal stenographer or telegrapher. Well, this turns into stock opportunities. Those stock opportunities turn into money. That money that he makes allows him to buy his way out of the Civil War. What could wealthy people do in the North to prevent from having to serve? What could they pay for in their place? You're on the right path. A substitute. So he pays a substitute to take his place in the war, and he realizes after the war that a lot of bridges in America are going to have to be rebuilt. They don't need to be wooden, they need to be iron. So what he's now getting himself involved in is not only the iron industry, but he also gets himself involved in the bridge building industry, building iron bridges. And what he does with that fortune that he makes, and with the help of a lot of other investors at the turn of the 20th century, he takes all that money and he gambles on the Bessemer process. He visits Sheffield, England, sees how the process is done, puts up all these investments, and his entire wealth bets on the Bessemer process, brings it to Pittsburgh, and it's a huge success. The price of steel plummets. This is going to not only lead to the improvement of railroads, bridges, and cities, but how will America start to build in our cities? Oh, this is like the birth of the American what in cities? Skyscrapers, all right? Very good. Carnegie ends up becoming one of the richest men in the world. At the turn of the 20th century in 1901, well, before I get into that, he is going to publish it was actually a speech turned into a pamphlet called Wealth, the Gospel of Wealth, where Carnegie tries to explain, because he comes from hard times, he tries to explain that the good old days are not the good old days, and that not everybody's going to get rich. A new theory comes about after the Civil War ends, thanks to a guy by the name of Charles Darwin. What Carnegie and other industrialists are going to do is to apply Darwin's theory to business. What is that theory? Yes, evolution, but I'm looking for something else. You're on the right path. Survival of the fittest, which is natural selection. Survival of the fittest. We call that social Darwinism. We'll talk more about it when we get into lesson 13. So the Gospel of Wealth becomes very popular. I don't know if you realize, like, Origin of Species by Darwin, that was like published right at the end of the American Civil War. So, at the turn of the 20th century, J.P. Morgan, financier, is going to buy Carnegie Steel Corporation for $480 million. This will become America's first billion-dollar corporation. Carnegie takes everything, all of his wealth, and donates it to charity and philanthropy. He felt like he actually made a promise to himself when he was like 35 that he was going to do it in a 2-year period. The promise passed him by, and nearly everything that Carnegie made was handed over to build libraries, schools, science centers. What are some famous things that Carnegie's name is tied to? Carnegie Mellon University in Pittsburgh, good, which is named for Carnegie and Andrew Mellon, who served as Secretary of Treasury in the early 1900s. What else? Where are my performing arts lovers? Carnegie what? Hall. Okay? So that's a little bit about how the Bessemer process makes it from Sheffield, England to Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. Awesome. Here, hang on. Can't choose. Down the hall. And well. No. You're good. Go down the left. Yeah, you're good. All right. So on the left, we have Carnegie, and on the right, we have Henry Bessemer. Rockefeller, based out of Cleveland, Ohio, by the late 1800s, oil was beginning to be used with gas-burning internal combustion engines. Prior to the Civil War, what animal was oil extracted from for the most part? Whales. Excellent job. Whaling was big business prior to the Civil War. However, now we're starting to see the use of crude oil. In the early days, people that discovered crude oil thought their land was worthless. But over time, in the post-war era, they realized crude oil can be used as an energy source. So Rockefeller is going to strike a deal with Cornelius Vanderbilt to move his oil on Vanderbilt rail lines. Ultimately, Vanderbilt's rail lines will be controlled by J.P. Morgan. You guys see a theme here? All these people are connected. Rockefeller, ruthless and mirthless, but also a devout Christian, organized the Standard Oil Company of Ohio in 1882, based out of Cleveland. I don't know if you all realize this, but there was like a lake of oil beneath Cleveland. Much of the early crude oil in America was coming out of Appalachia or the foothills of Appalachia. A lot of times when we think about oil, we think about Texas, but they're not going to discover oil in Texas, and they discovered it in Spindletop, Texas at the turn of the 20th century. Rockefeller, at his height in the late 1880s, will control 90% of all American oil and 95% of all American oil refinery. He is the wealthiest of the robber baron tycoons. He crushed weaker competitors through what was known as, in his opinion, the natural process. The natural process were two economic strategies. Have you all learned about vertical and horizontal integration in econ? Not yet. I'm going to teach you about it today, so you'll have a leg up. In his defense, they did produce superior oil. And there are other monopolies that produce superior products. Like, for example, Armour and Swift, conglomerated meat packing organizations, did a pretty good job with their industry early on. It did get wildly corrupt and pretty gross as time went on. We're actually going to talk about that when we get into the progressive era. See that octopus? In the political cartoon, it represents Standard Oil. Its tentacles stretching across the country, but wrapping itself around Congress, Supreme Court, and reaching for the White House. All right, so let's talk a little bit about consolidation and trust. Older Eastern railroads, like the New York Central, which was headed by Cornelius Vanderbilt, often financed the railroads that are going to be built in the West. And remember, not all of the railroad companies that are new, that are developed in the West, are successful. When J.P. Morgan purchased the New York Central from the Vanderbilt family, he will force the consolidation of two of the most powerful railroad companies in the East. It's through what is called the Corsair Pact, named for his yacht in which they formed this consolidation. The two companies were the New York Central and the Penn Railroads, which gave Morgan at least some type of share and control of just about all of the railroads at the turn of the century. Remember that we talked about before, at the turn of the century, there's almost 200,000 miles of rail track laid, Morgan had control or some sort of influence over all but 40,000 miles of rail track in the country. That's a significant amount of power. All right? The reason that I talk about the Corsair Pact, he has this consolidation occur on the yacht. They go out to sea and he says, hey, everybody, we're all consolidating and I'm in control now. And some of the people are like, we're not interested. And he says, all right, well, the boat doesn't go back to dock until everyone signs on the dotted line to consolidate. That is what we call extortion, which was very common among the monopoly tycoons. Trusts and cartels, also often referred to as pools, were perfected by tycoons like J.P. Morgan, James J. Hill, who was a business partner of Morgan's, Cornelius Vanderbilt, and John D. Rockefeller. Here are the ways in which this worked for monopolies to thrive and succeed. You have what is called vertical integration, and you have what is called horizontal integration. Vertical integration is very simple, and it's also very difficult to make illegal in a free market system. Vertical integration means you control every part of the process, from production to retail. You control all the middlemen, right? So can anyone in here give me an example of a present-day company that has utilized a vertical integration since they started in the 1990s? Yeah, a little bit, because they have their own stores now. I'm looking for another company with an A. Amazon. How, in what ways is Amazon achieved vertical integration? They have their own drivers. They have their own vans. They have their own shipping. They have their own products now. And they have their own production facilities. How many people own like a product that's like Amazon Essentials? Oh, cool. Yeah. Yeah, same. That's vertical integration. All right? Rockefeller used it. Carnegie used it. Henry Ford used it. All of these, they want to eliminate the middleman. So it's very hard to make that illegal. Vertical integration. Horizontal integration, a little bit different. Here's how horizontal integration works out. Each row of you all is a competing business against me. And for the sake of Rockefeller, let's say that it's oil. I come in here and I'm like, hey guys, do you all want to be a part of this? Or do you want to take me on? And you're like, forget it. Let's go to economic war. I lower my prices so low, I run you all out of business. I buy you guys up. I do the same to you, to you, to you, to you, to you, to you. And now I control the oil industry. And then I say to myself, okay, I have the monopoly on oil. I've eliminated my competition. But I want limited liability. So I've got to get you guys that have the skill set and know the industry to work for me. Does that make sense? And that is where consolidated trusts come about. Where I'm like, all right, sorry that I destroyed your lives. I want you all to work with me and work for me. And I go all the way down. But then we get caught up in some legal trouble, and I'm like, hey, sorry, you're going to have to do some jail time. Keep your mouth shut. But in the end, it's going to be okay. What does this sound like? Organized what? Crime. Organized crime in the early 1900s got their techniques and methods from these guys. Okay? So, pools and cartels, they're a little different. I would like to explain their difference. A pool is when we have the same business model and we're like competitors, but we're not really competitors. And we like set our prices together and we're like conglomerated and working together. That's a pool. Cartels are a little different, okay? For the sake of the cartel, like you guys are railroad, your oil, your steel. I'm like, look, I need all of us to work together. That's how a cartel works. Does that make sense? All right, cool. Questions about that? Okay. So, often we refer to this as like the oligopoly. Does this type of thing still happen? It does, but not as much, because there are now laws put into place to prevent this from happening in business. We want to prevent it from happening, but sometimes it creeps back up. I mean, I'll well, how's this? In your lifetime, there was a darn near, like really, really close monopoly that almost happened, and the government blocked it. AT&T was going to buy what company? And it got blocked. And now they're still trying to hustle you to get on their phone plan. They'll promise you the world. No, they're way too powerful. T-Mobile. Yeah, T-Mobile. AT&T tried to buy T-Mobile and the government said, sorry. Everything from SEC, Security and Exchange Commission, which I'm going to teach you about later. There's also numerous committees that are established, congressional committees that have that oversight. Yeah. It actually starts here, to be honest. So the first president that gets the ball rolling on an attempt to regulate monopolies was Grover Cleveland with the creation of the Interstate Commerce Commission to try to combat the railroad. However, as we know, the ICC didn't really work out that well because by this point, the railroad was way too powerful. So not a lot was accomplished in that first attempt. The first, antitrust legislation that kind of sticks is in 1890 with the Sherman Antitrust Act, named for William T. Sherman's brother, John Sherman. Remember William T. Sherman, the guy that burned Georgia in the Civil War? John Sherman basically says, we don't have a king in America. Why should we allow corporations to be king and control what consumers in America have the ability to purchase and not purchase? Does that make sense? That was the whole premise of this. So the guy that signs the Sherman Antitrust Act into law is President Benjamin Harrison. So the premise of the Sherman Antitrust Act was to forbid combinations that would restrict trade. Here's what I mean by combinations. Trusts, pools, interlocking directorates, which are basically corporations that are working together and sometimes sort of in secret, there's businesses kind of pulling the levers behind the scenes and interlocking directorates. Holding companies, are you familiar with what those are? holding companies would be like, okay, you're my, what did I say you were? You're my oil company. No, you're my railroad. You're my oil. You're my steel. You're my holding company. You guys are investors. I need you to convince them that they're investing in something, but we don't want them to know that they're investing in that. Does that make sense? That is no longer allowed. But you would have to understand that even in today's world, you might have to do some digging to find out what you're actually investing in some companies, or at least in some larger vehicles. I'm going to get way off track here, so I need to pull it back in. All right. Sherman also didn't deal with price fixing. So the other major issue here is that these tycoons have teams of lawyers who are highly educated, and they're able to just kind of rip all this to shreds and move forward. We really don't see the monopolies challenged on any major level until the presidency of Teddy Roosevelt, William Howard Taft, and Woodrow Wilson. I mean, Roosevelt personally took on J.P. Morgan and Rockefeller. Taft is largely forgotten, but Taft actually did more trust busting than Roosevelt. The real major change for trust busting will come about during Wilson's presidency, and that's through the passage of the Clayton Antitrust Act, through Wilson's New Freedom Program, that shores up the loopholes that the lawyers jumped through in the Sherman Antitrust Act. And that one was named for Senator Henry D. Clayton, Jr. Questions up to this point? All right. So, this is Roosevelt taking on Standard Oil on the left, and on the right, that's Roosevelt taking on J.P. Morgan and the railroads. All right. So, miracles of mechanization in the Second Industrial Revolution. Bless you. In 1860, prior to the Civil War, the U.S. was the world's fourth largest manufacturing nation. By the turn of the 20th century, America was number one. America had abundant liquid capital and was fully exploiting our natural resources, notably coal, oil, timber, and iron. This is why Teddy Roosevelt is also well remembered as a president that pushed for what at the turn of the century? Very good. Conservation. Excellent job. Because we were doing some real bad stuff to the environment at this period of time. Just destroying our own drinking water. Deforesting much of the West. It was really pretty insane. So, mass immigration made labor cheap. People all over the world crave the American dream. There's a lot of opportunity, clearly. American ingenuity plays a vital role as mass production is being refined and perfected. There's another thing that the Civil War did that is important for advancements in American science, ingenuity, and advancements in technology. What did the Morrill Land Grant Act do after the Civil War for our country? What did it create? New what? Morrill Land Grant Act. We talked about new colleges. Very good. And a lot of these new colleges start to dial in and focus on, like, the Civil War especially was like, we need to become more educated in what types of fields in this country. Medicine? Also? What's up? Law and mathematics and engineering. Yes, education as well, for sure. I'll actually talk to you about that as we move forward, like the growth of public education. If you think about like some of the top engineering schools in the country, what are some, let's throw MIT out, sorry. They're the best, but let's talk about some other top engineering schools. Name a few.
Caltech.
Good? Virginia Tech? Anybody else? They're good that they already existed. They're good that they already existed. Top engineering schools in America. NC State, or MIT, I'm throwing out. Michigan State? Penn State? Yeah, I'm throwing them out though.
Aren't they mostly like land grant schools?
Yes, that's exactly what I'm talking about. The Moral Land Grant Act is going to expand our ingenuity. All right? Is that helpful? Excellent. Good job. Well done. All right. So, popular inventions that come out of the Second Industrial Revolution: cash register, stock ticker, typewriter, refrigerator car, and later the refrigerator. Electric dynamo, which a lot of people, this is the precursor to what innovation that a lot of people would like to have in their homes, particularly today with the weather. No? What do we really like to have in our homes when bad storms come through? Generators. The electric dynamo is the precursor to it's like the early technology of what will become the generator. Vacuum cleaners, electric railways. Your first electric streetcar was here in Richmond. Subways in Boston and New York. Improvements in water quality, improvements in sewage. In 1876, Alexander Graham Bell invented the telephone. A new age of communication was launched, which is very interesting because guess what? That becomes yet another monopoly. This is like just in your lifetime that one phone company didn't monopolize everything. I lived in an era where it was pretty much just one phone company, because there was a time in my life when I didn't have a cell phone. There were not other carriers. Does that make sense? So now we're like opening up another monopolized business. Thomas Edison, Wizard of Menlo Park, inventor of the light bulb in 1879. He also had like another 1,000 inventions. Another one of his really important inventions is the phonograph, which is the forerunner to what? That we are all very much in love with. Film. Who loves movies? All of us, right? This is like the precursor to what will become silent film. And then later, talkies, which we'll talk about in the Roaring Twenties. Henry Ford's assembly line for automobiles, the Model A, the Wright brothers airplane, the 1902 glider. Has anybody gone to Kitty Hawk and done the
Sorry, a great place to knock. Can I see a
yeah. Anybody been? Nice. Did you guys like go all the way up to the why Kitty Hawk? Why do these bicycle makers from Dayton choose Kitty Hawk? Anybody know? Okay, the dunes, but also what do they get a lot of there? Wind. The dunes and the wind is why they chose that. Nikola Tesla, Serbian-American inventor, electrical and mechanical engineer and physicist, best known for the design of the modern alternating current, as well as the induction motor. And then James Buchanan Buck Duke. He is going to invent and develop the mass production of the American cigarette. I know that seems weird, but it becomes big business. So big that he's able to move that money into hydroelectricity and becomes the benefactor of what will become Duke University. Hold on.
Good afternoon, residents. Tech Center students who have just returned, please head to the closed commons and hang out there until it is time for dismissal. And thank you for getting back safely.
Cool. All right. So we have Edison, we have Bell, we have Tesla. Beautiful, because I'm about to be done here. All right. What other tycoons built colleges, or their money built colleges? Nashville. What famous college in Nashville? Vanderbilt. Palo Alto, California. What famous college is there? Stanford. Very good. These are Duke. These benefactors give quite a bit of money. Here are the Wright brothers, first in flight, and that's assembly line in Dearborn, Michigan. This one's really cool. That's the electric streetcar in Richmond, the Sprague streetcar. This is a really famous event. That is the World's Fair held in Chicago. Highly recommended book for you guys. The Devil in the White City by Eric Larson. Really great book. The reason I pulled the World's Fair into this is because a lot of those innovations were on display at the Chicago World's Fair. So this is where I pump the brakes today. America's second industrial revolution. We see the standard of living rise. Immigrants swarm to the U.S. to achieve the American dream. And we also see the growth of labor unions. Cities like New York, Pittsburgh, Detroit, Cleveland, and Chicago become industrial cities with factories, tenements, and poverty. Women, African Americans, I'm going to teach you about the great migration of African Americans from the South in lesson 12 here soon. Are going to head north for jobs and west for jobs. Also, immigrants were drawn to industrial cities in urban areas to find new opportunity. We are going to start to see a major shift where prior to the Civil War and even after the Civil War, most Americans live in rural communities. After the turn of the 20th century, we're going to start to see more people living in urban areas and suburban areas. Farmers were becoming wage earners. Even farming and ranching was becoming big business. Pressure on foreign trade during this era. We're going to talk about tariffs as we move forward. Large waves of immigrants is going to launch the theory of the melting pot. The idea of like all these different cultures coming together. Anybody ever visited New York or Chicago? That it still has the melting pot feeling. We also have to look at economic opportunity, industrialization, technological change, and immigration, all fueling this population growth and widespread urbanization. As we already know, Irish and German immigrants were coming over in droves prior to and after the Civil War. But as we move into the post-Reconstruction era and the turn of the 20th century, new immigrants are coming in from Southern and Eastern Europe, Italy, Greece, Poland, Russia, Latvia, Lithuania, and Slavic countries Asia, mainly China and Japan, and from Latin America, mainly Mexico. But we need to take an opportunity to recognize that a lot of the Mexican mestizos that were living in America had been Mexican citizens or were sort of caught in between this situation of the post-Mexican War. Does that make sense? Where they were Mexican, they become assimilated Americans, and their children are American, but they're not giving up their culture and traditions, notably in the Southwest. So, why are immigrants coming? The same reason people came before. Seeking freedom, better lives for their families. They're trying to achieve the American dream. So, this political cartoon, The Melting Pot, there's one immigrant group that really suffers a lot of discrimination in this era. This little guy has a dagger, an orange sash, and a green flag with a harp on it. What's that little immigrant guy supposed to represent? He almost looks like a leprechaun. The Irish. Yes. There's a lot of Irish immigrants are coming in, and when they come in, and some of them join unions, they get a bit hostile, some cases quite violent, some are even tied to anarchist groups. So there's a lot of discrimination against Irish immigrants. I absolutely love this picture on the right. This is an image of Chicago on the intersection of Dearborn and Randolph Street at the turn of the 20th century. You've got streetcars, trucks, wagons, horses, people. It's total chaos. I find it really, really interesting. That's all I've got for today. Questions? That's good. What's up?